Yeah, so see, I
Really excited. All right, let's go ahead and start back in 1 minute. 1 minute. 1 Rolls across the parking lot to somebody else's car.
Well, you better like that.
It's like a dance floor out
In my one Let me tell you, this is something just around here. Like if y'all ever need another campus, in Cartersville, the sons of the church that my husband went to, they bought a high school. What an awesome church facility! It has an auditorium. Yes, it does. Has schoolrooms. Has a cafeteria. Has a good kitchen. Has a playground. Has the fields. Like I mean, parking, everything. That is genius. Isn't that genius? I would think there aren't too many of those that come up on the real estate market that are absorbed. But like, I mean, you know, yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. Yeah.
Oh, I don't like it.
Yeah.
What you already doing?
I can live with this. That way I'll be able to tell. Yes.
Typical size.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. Let's since we did not talk about the communication styles assessment, let's talk about that really quickly. And then we will move on and talk about some crucial conversation stuff. Because as we talk about all of this change, you guys know there are crucial conversations to come, right? Anytime you are leading people to change, there are crucial conversations that need to be had. So, of the communication style assessment, how many of you guys scored as action-oriented communicators? That was either your top or your second communication style. You are the action-oriented people. Okay, so there are a few of you guys in here. So action-oriented people, you guys can see on the next page in your notes, I kind of got the whole description up there, in there, but so I'm not gonna go over all of that. You guys can read and you can learn on your own. Action-oriented people, they want to get down to the brass tacks of things, and they want the bullet points, okay? They want to know, what do we have to do? Whenever you are in some sort of a meeting, whenever you're communicating with an action-oriented person, they want to hear verbs that are action-oriented, okay? They want you to be specific and to tell them, hey, this is what is next. So they want a clear direction, and they want to know what are the next steps that we need to take and who's going to take it, all right? So as you are, they're very direct, they're practical, they're thinking about next steps, okay? That is your action-oriented person. How many of you guys scored process-oriented? Style number 2, process-oriented, okay? We got a couple of those in here. These are people that value strategy and systems, organization, facts. These are the people that are very logical. They want to have the data. They want to analyze the data. They want to organize the data. They want to look at ministries and programs, and they want to create systems and develop systems in order for those things to thrive. I'm going to tell you guys that your action-oriented people, they're going to get things done, but your systems and your process people, those are going to be the people that figure out how to do this and make it scalable. So it doesn't just depend on one person getting it done, but you create a system that makes it an ongoing thing that you can plug other people into, okay? And the kinds of words that they're looking for are words that that indicate that you are looking to develop a process for whatever the ministry is, okay? How many of you guys scored style 3, people? Look at all of the people in here. Do you guys know what is so interesting is that in ministry, we tend to have more ministry leaders who are people, obviously, but also on the other side of that can tend to be people pleasers. Have you ever thought about the fact that anytime you do something in ministry, people are going to be so grateful that you did it. They're going to give you all these accolades and all this praise. And for those of us who tend to be people, if we're not careful about it, we can tend to go overboard and begin doing things for the wrong reasons. So for those of you guys who are people, it is great. You're in the right place because ministry is all about people. But sometimes when you get those accolades and that's how you receive communication, it's a dangerous place because you can tend to say, oh, I'm doing it for this instead of doing it for God, the real reason that we're there. So that is just a little bit of a warning for them. So people who communicate in this style, they focus on relationships, teamwork, collaboration. They want to get people in a room together, and you guys want to work out those things together. You want the whole team to be working together toward that end result, okay? So those people who communicate in this way, they're not going to be okay if you say, hey, you and I are going to make this decision and then we're going to move on.
No, they're going to be like, no, we need to involve other people in this. We need to get everybody in the room. And I need to look people in the eyeballs and make sure that everybody is okay, that their heart is cared for, okay? Those are the kinds of people that communicate in that way. How many of you guys are style 4 idea people? Oh, those are my people right there. That's me too. Idea people, we love theories and possibilities and what ifs. And we just want to sit and bat around ideas, which drives the action-oriented people crazy because we're okay just talking about theories of the things. And then it drives the process people crazy because they're thinking, you can't feasibly do this. There is no system for this. You can't. And we're like, hey, it's fine. So Jay, one of the things that he says all the time is, don't bother me with details while I'm dreaming. What do you guys think Jay's method of communication is? Exactly. He's an idea person. So these are most often your visionary people that are far ahead, that are moving you forward, that are thinking about things outside the box, thinking about lots of possibilities. Idea people, whereas your process people want the facts and the data, idea people don't need the facts and the data to begin thinking about things. They would almost rather not start with the facts and the data. They just want to dream. Here's the thing. Like I said earlier, what often happens is that we tend to communicate in the style that we want to be communicated to. Because I love ideas, I would tend to just share all of my ideas with you. And then I would say, let's do it. And Nick is like, do what? You know? He's like, you haven't told me anything to do. And so Nick's not motivated to follow me because I'm just sharing the ideas, the concepts, the theories, what if? And Nick's like, I need something tangible. And if I say, okay, let's go, and one of the rest of you guys who are people, you're like, wait, what about the rest of the team? Like how are we all involved in this? So as leaders, we need to recognize our own bias for how we communicate. And we've got to make sure that we realize that when we're communicating to a large group of people and we don't know their communication style, we've got to realize that there are people that communicate in all of these styles in the room. So if you are trying to lead change, make sure that you come in with a process and a system, with data that you can analyze and draw conclusions from. Make sure that you come in with an idea and a vision. Make sure that you follow that up with action steps that are practical, that you can say, okay, here are the next 5 things that we're going to do, and here are the people that are going to be responsible for that, and then here's how we're going to know if that succeeds. And then those action people are going to be ready to break and go do the thing. Make sure that you're paying attention to the relational needs of the people in the group. Check with them. How are you feeling about this? What are you thinking about this? Giving people a place to speak into that. We can't just communicate in the way that we want to be communicated to if we're going to lead people through change. And so if you are kind of evenly balanced in all of those things, then that means it's easier for you to speak those 4 different languages.
I don't know, it makes me feel like I'm a big hot mess.
So for me, I am 12 on action oriented, I'm 6 on process oriented, 8 on people oriented, and 14 on idea oriented, okay? So process oriented, I'm kind of like Jay. I'm like, if I'm dreaming, I don't want to be thinking about the details. I just want to dream about the things. But I know that there are people on my team that, for example, Chris, he's not here. He is a big processor. And so if I'm going to lead Chris in this decision that we're doing, and then I'm going to have to show him the facts and the data, and I'm going to have to say, okay, how are we going to turn this into a system that we'll then be able to use? And who will do that system and what will that look like. So I've learned that I've got to speak that language in order to help lead him in that way. Diane?
I used to have a real hard time working with those people too, and one of the things that I found is helpful is to give them a history of something similar
Yes,
to what
That's
they're trying to do.
that's good.
What
Yeah.
are you saying about us? I'm a 2. I'm a hard 2. I'm a 17 on 2. I'm a process card.
Claim it, claim it, claim it.
I got big ideas and I just don't want to be one. You figure it out. I'll give you the idea, you figure it out.
Yeah, that's what I would.
No, it doesn't.
Sounds like a thing.
Yes,
I
and
do
so,
the details, but I can't. I
Yes.
literally cannot see the details.
yes, and I love that some of you guys are recognizing the fact that sometimes you have to give that away to the people who can process the things, or sometimes if you know that you're doing something new and you just can't catch that vision, it just can't, then give that to that vision person and say, come up with 100 different ideas of what is possible, and guaranteed tomorrow they're going to come back to you with a list of 100 different ideas of what is possible, and then you guys can begin to synthesize that and to put that into a system. So you don't have to be all of those things. You have to recognize who you are and that there are lots of other ways that people tend to communicate. And so as a leader, I've got to recognize that and know, especially if I'm working with a small team of people, if I'm communicating just with a team, I know that Chris is a processor, and I know he's on my team, and we're going to have to do that. I know that Josh is a visionary person, and so I know that I need to communicate in that way with Josh. We know that Jay is a visionary person, so I'm going to need to communicate that way with Jay. So know who is on your team and how they receive communication best. So if you guys take this assessment and then get those of you who are on your team, get them to do this, then you're gonna know who are the processors, that when I'm stuck and I need a process or a system, well, I'm gonna take it to Chris. Who is that on your team? That way you can figure that out and know, okay?
So what if you're going through the process and there's somebody missing on your team?
Oh, I'm
People
so
miss. How
glad
do
you asked.
incorporate that?
Yes. So here's the thing. Let's say that you have a bunch of people on a team and they're all action oriented and vision oriented, and you don't have any processors. As you look for the next person to add to your team, you're going to need to say, hey, who's a system thinker? Who thinks differently than we do? A lot of times what we do is, instead of being strategic about looking for people's strengths and communication styles, we say, hey, who do I like?
Yeah.
Who thinks like me? And then we get those people on there. Well, that's more vision people. So then you sit in a room with vision people and you guys have all these ideas, and then you walk out and you're like, man, that felt so good.
Now,
And why isn't it getting done? Well, because you didn't have any action people, or you didn't have any process people, or whatever it is. So I would love for you guys to think about recruiting new people to your team in terms of what gifts and thinking processes do they bring to the table. Now, if you are on a team with a bunch of action-oriented people and idea people, and you introduce a process person there, there's going to be some friction. But if you recognize the value in that process person, then you're going to be able to say, hey, you know what? You see a perspective that I don't see. You speak a language that I don't see. I need you to speak into this process. Because if we don't have a balanced team, then we're missing somebody. We're missing something really, really big. So that was a great question.
we did a team building thing with some training that I went through one time, and we had this one guy on our team that all of us looked at, we thought he's the biggest airhead. He's hyper. I mean, he was so different than the rest of us. And in each of the little activities that we did, there was one that none of us could figure out how to complete it. But he was the one, the first time he spoke, we went through it. And at that point, we realized how important it was to have that one person who, in all reality, annoyed us in any other problem-solving thing because he was just so off from us. But for that need, he was the perfect person, and we could not have completed it without him.
Which is often the case. It makes us feel uncomfortable when people are used to doing things in a different way than we are and thinking in a different way than we are. So that's good. That's very true. All right. Well, we're going to head on over in our notebooks to Crucial Conversations. Have any of you guys read this book, Crucial Conversations? Nick has? Then Nick knows what a good book this is. Yeah. So I don't know if you guys have a books to read list. I hope that you will put this on your books to read list. Because when you are leading through change, you are going to have crucial conversations. It's going to come up. It is what it is. So here's how the author, who is Carrie Patterson, Joseph Grenny, and Ron McMillan, authors, 3 of them, describe crucial conversations. Here's how they define it. Crucial conversations are conversations that happen when the stakes are high, opinions vary, and emotions run strong. You guys ever have any of those 3 present in your conversation? Like maybe this morning? I don't know.
Is that on paper or are you just reading that from somewhere?
That's in my notes.
Oh.
So
Can you say
the
it one more time?
stakes are high, the emotions run strong, and opinions vary. Exactly. So the stakes are high, emotions run strong, and opinions vary. Those are crucial conversations. Now, here's the thing. Whenever we are faced with the opportunity to change, change takes us outside of our comfort zone. And whenever we get uncomfortable, there is a tendency to respond with this fight or flight kind of mentality. That I want to maintain my sense of comfort. And so I'm either going to come out swinging and I'm gonna fight for my comfort, or I'm just gonna walk away and go somewhere else because I'm gonna stay in my comfort zone and I'm gonna leave this potential change that is here because I wanna stay comfortable. The antidote to that is curiosity. And I talked about this earlier. That curiosity helps us say, well, you know what? Instead of fighting for my comfort, for what is true for me now, what I know, instead of fighting and instead of fleeing and saying, forget it, I'm out here, you guys go ahead, I'm going to stay in my comfort zone. What if we get curious and we ask ourselves, what's possible? What's possible in this change? What is the potential? What is it that God wants me to learn from this? Where is it that I can grow? When we get curious, then all of a sudden, it kind of opens up this potential of willingness to understand and willingness to explore. It doesn't mean that you're immediately saying yes to the change. That's the first step. Curiosity is the first step to change. It's saying, what if? What is possible? And as we do that, one of the things that we'll realize is that our crucial conversations go a little bit better when we adopt kind of a mindset and an attitude of curiosity. Because in crucial conversations, a lot of times we take a defensive or an offensive posture. And we say, come on, bring it on. Let's fight this thing out together. Instead of saying, hey, bring it on. Let's figure this thing out together. Those are 2 different stances. And what the authors of this Crucial Conversations book talk about is how can we do that in a way that we have a conversation with each other this way instead of a conversation with each other this way. After I read this book, I have one teenager at home now, but when I read this book, I had a preteen and a teenager at home. And one of the things that I began to do is whenever Rosalind and I would have some sort of confrontation or whatever, instead of sitting across from each other, I would just go and sit beside her. Do you guys know that it is really hard to have a fight when you're sitting like next to the person, when you're sitting physically beside them? It's much harder because you always want to, swing around and get at each other's face. But here is the interesting thing is that even body language communicates something different. It communicates a different connection. And the way that the author of this book kind of puts it is that you have these pools of understanding or these pools of meaning, okay? In a crucial conversation, here's me, and this is my pool of understanding of that situation. This is the story that I tell myself about what is happening and what change may be on the way or whatever is happening in our relationship or with our situation. This is my understanding, which is colored and affected by my previous experience, by my current circumstances, by my makeup, by my personality style. All of those things kind of come into my pool of understanding. And then you have this other pool of understanding, which would be your pool of understanding, okay? So you have two people in this, and each one has a different pool of understanding because we have different experiences and different makeups, and we see things very differently. And a lot of times what happens when we get into these situations where the stakes are high and opinions vary and emotions run strong, we face off. And all of a sudden, what I'm trying to do is convince you to come to my pool of understanding. Well, that's ridiculous because you cannot be in my shoes. And so what the authors say is that you need this middle ground right here where there is shared understanding, that you have shared experiences, that you have shared understanding, that you have shared values that you talk about. And you moved some of yours over here to this pool, and this person moved some of theirs over here to this pool, and then all of a sudden you begin to have this shared understanding. This is when you come alongside the person and you say, hey, what are you hearing? And what am I hearing? And how do we work through this together? Instead of saying, hey, you need to come over here and get in my pool of understanding. That's not going to happen. So how do you do that? How do you create these shared pools of understanding? Here's what they say in the book. Oh, look at all this stuff. Okay, here we go. Crucial conversations. Oh, well, I didn't put any of that. Okay, so go in your notebook because that's where we're going to start. So the first one is, I think in your notebook you guys have start with the heart. Is that it? Okay, start with the heart. Start with the heart, and by the heart, I mean your own heart. A lot of times we want to examine the other person's heart and figure out what's wrong with them. Yes, you have the wrong motivations. Yes, you have the wrong perspective. Yes, you. I'm talking about start with my heart. What are my motivations? What am I trying to accomplish? What's going on with me? Because a lot of times what I bring to the table is what creates that conflict very often. And each of us has that. That's part of my own pool of understanding is identifying that and having the self-awareness to say, hey, what's going on? What's going on with me? You need to stay focused in the middle of your conversation, in the middle of your crucial conversation. Begin focusing on yourself first before you focus on the other person. So take a look inside and then refocus your brain. As you have the conversation, ask yourself, how would I respond if I truly loved this person? How would I respond if I truly loved this person? Because a lot of times when we are at the beginning of one of these crucial conversations, we're not thinking about that, are we? But if we were able to refocus, to stop and refocus, how would I respond if I truly loved this person? That puts our heart in the right place in order to have that conversation. The second thing is learn to look. Learn to look at what is happening. Learn to look at the situation. Sometimes in the middle of heated conversations, we get so into what we are saying and we're already formulating our next response as the other person is talking. But what would it look like? What would it look like if we just stopped and we paid attention to the other person and stopped ourselves from thinking about our own response and how we're going to make a comeback? But we paid attention to what the person is saying, but also how the person is saying it. We pay attention to their body language. We pay attention to their breathing. We pay attention to their facial expressions. We pay attention to how they are responding and acting. Do you guys remember, was it the last time we were here with Derek, how he talked about levels of meaning, and he said that most of the meaning that we get from conversations is not from the words that is said, it's from the body language. And we totally miss that if we're so consumed with what we're going to say and how we're going to respond. We totally miss that whole ability to interpret somebody's words based on their body language. So learn to look at what is being said and how it's being said. And then make it safe. Have you guys ever heard the term psychological safety? So there is a thing called psychological safety that speaks to the fact that whenever you're in a relationship or a conversation with someone, there is a safety, a feeling that you know that this is a safe person to have a tough conversation with, okay? Or this is not a safe person to have a tough conversation with. All of us know it intuitively, but what this is saying is make it safe for the other person to have a conversation with you. So a lot of times we can respond with either silence or violence. And either we respond by lashing out, and the minute we lash out, that breaks that psychological safety. And all of a sudden people say, oh, it's not safe to have a conversation with you. It's not safe for me to continue on in this. Or we can respond with silence. And once again, that's just as dangerous. That person knows this is not safe for me to have a conversation with you. So as the leader, as someone who is trying to help initiate these kinds of crucial conversations, we've got to create a safe place for people to have conversations with us, which means that we have to be able to respond appropriately to the situation. Have you guys ever been skipping rocks? Or just when my kids were little, all they wanted to do is have a pile of rocks and just throw them into a pond. I don't know why that's so mesmerizing, but it was just, they just loved it. And you see the ripple that rolls out. What would you do if you threw a pebble in a pond and there was like this huge big cannonball splash? I mean, what would you do? You would be like, oh, I don't feel safe here, right?
Another one.
Yeah, or Eddie would be like, let's see what happens next. But it's the same way when people have a conversation with us. When they throw something out there to us and we respond, oh, in a way that is not appropriate to the situation, at an energy level or a passion that isn't appropriate to the situation, then it creates a disconnect in that psychological safety. So we have to learn how to respond appropriately to the situation. If it's a pebble that's launched, then we need to have a small ripple. If it's a huge big boulder, then we need to respond appropriately. If you throw in a huge big boulder in the pond and then nothing happens, that's not safe either, is it? So we've got to know how to respond appropriately, which creates that sense of psychological safety. We have to master our stories. Master our stories. Remember when we said, this is my pool of meaning right here? These are the stories that I tell myself in my head about this situation. We can take those thoughts captive and we can master them. As a matter of fact, that's what we're told to do. It's not only possible, but it's actually expected of us as Christians and as leaders in order to master the stories that we are telling ourselves. A lot of times what makes up that pool of meaning right there are assumptions. They're conclusions that we have drawn. They're assumptions that we make based on our very limited understanding of the situation, based on our perspective of the situation. And so we've got to begin to master our stories and to be able to question our own assumptions. Why am I feeling this way? What in my past has called me to feel this way? We've got to take those thoughts captive and we've got to run them through a filter to figure out why we're thinking about this and looking at this the way that we are. So we've got to master our stories. Number 5, I've got to state my path. Oh, yes, Diane.
Can you elaborate on run them through a filter?
Run them through a filter. So one of the filters that I use is it true? Is this helpful? What I am thinking, is this helpful? Is it necessary? Is this even necessary for me to think this at this time or say this at this time? Is this true just for me? Or is it true universally? A lot of times, if it's true for me, then I make the assumption that it's true for everybody else. Not always. Because sometimes, now there is truth, okay? I'm not talking about truth. I'm talking about the little things that I feel like are true for me in the way I'm thinking. So those are some questions. What am I missing? Because there's always a perspective that I'm missing. What am I missing? What assumptions am I making? Another one is, how is fear driving this? Because 99.9% of the time, there is some sort of fear that is driving my actions. So what fear is driving this or motivating me? All right. So master my stories, state my path. I think in your notes, did I write down the different ways to state your path? Okay, so state your path. That means share the facts. And by facts, I mean facts. Not just stories that are anecdotes that you're stating as facts, but really state the facts. What do we know? What do we together know? Not just what do I know that you need to know, okay? But what do we together know to be true? And then I'm going to tell you anecdotes. And then I'm going to say, from my point of view or from my situation, based on my understanding, here's what I understand to be true, or here's how I'm feeling about this, or here's how I see it. And then you ask for the other person's facts and stories. So what is some more shared fact that we can agree on? What are some things that you see as fact that I don't see? What is your story? What's your situation? How are you seeing this? Get their perspective. And then begin to dialogue tentatively. Don't just attack them. Well, you're wrong. This is not the fact, and this is, or you shouldn't feel that way. People are going to feel what they feel. And so you begin to talk tentatively and not state your opinions as facts. And if you have an opinion, don't state that in the fact part and say, well, I know this to be true. Because then you've just ruined your credibility. Because you haven't really stated a fact, you've just stated an opinion, okay? Opinions can come at a different time when you're not in this heated conversation. Encourage testing. Make it safe for others to express opposing views. Here's how you encourage that testing. When someone begins to express something that you feel is absolutely wrong or it's completely opposite of your understanding of this, your pool of meaning, when they begin to initiate that conversation and go there, how you react with your facial expressions, with your body language, with your tone, that either encourages them or discourages them. So you've got to make sure that you get to the place where you are able to be mature enough to physically absorb whatever they're saying and create that safe space for them to have this conversation. And truly listen. And truly, truly listen. Because the minute you don't, that psychological safety is done and they're not sharing anymore.
So at what point do you? There's sometimes that you just need to walk away. I mean, there's sometimes
Absolutely.
that this person just unloads on you
Mhm.
and they're not going to listen to anything you say. How long do you listen to it, or there's nothing that you can say to make it any better? How do you, at what point, how do you walk away nicely without offending them? And
So what you need to do is, first of all, you are very wise for saying that's what's needed. Because in some situations, you can continue to receive it and receive it and receive it and receive it, and then it just keeps, and then all of a sudden, you're going to blow at some point. So you've got to know your tolerance level for that. And so I used to teach third grade. And I used to teach third grade at-risk kids. So these were the kids that didn't qualify for special education. They were just above the line and just really, really struggled. So I had 16 of them in my class. Favorite kids in the world. And I remember I had this one boy, Arthur. And at the beginning of the year when I was getting to know my kids or whatever, Arthur had an anger management problem. And, you know, if somebody would say something to him, he was not having it. I mean, he would just boom and take care of it. And so I remember having this conversation with Arthur, and I would say, Arthur, you've got to learn how to listen. You've got to learn how to listen. God gave you 2 ears. You got to use them. Use your ears. And he would say, well, Ms. Wilson, I try to count to 10. But I only get to 2 before God calls me to respond. I'm like, well, Arthur, we're going to keep working on this. And by the end of our time together in that year, he was able to get to about 7 or 8, okay? Which was huge progress for Arthur. Huge progress for Arthur. But we all have to know what our number is. And when you see yourself approaching that number, you can say, if Rebecca is the one, you can say, Rebecca, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I think that I have absorbed everything that I can absorb right now, and I want to get back with you. Let's schedule a conversation where we can continue to talk about it. And then you just take a pause. And if Rebecca gets her feelings hurt because you've walked away, that's a whole lot better than her getting her feelings hurt because you've just come down on her really hard with all the things that you're thinking about in your head. So yeah, there'll be some people that will get offended by the fact that you walked away, but it'll be much better for both of you guys if you do walk away and take a pause.
Hopefully they don't follow you.
yeah.
And hopefully they don't follow you. And if they do, then you say, I've got to take some time to process. Thank you for caring enough to come and get me.
I think there's a statement of, I can't, like letting them know, not just cutting them off and walking, but letting them know this is why, and I want to return to it.
Yes.
Goes a long way.
And following up with that return
Yes.
too. Don't just say, hey, I want to get back with you on this, and then all of a sudden you become silent and you avoid the conflict. That is not helpful either. If you leave a conversation and you say, hey, I want to get back with you, then you actually follow through and you get back with that person. And probably more times than not, they are going to be in a different space the time that you come around and you have taken that pause. So you'll both be in a different place. And they'll actually have the benefit of hindsight to reflect on their pool of understanding in that moment and be able to speak more directly to what they were going through. Any other thoughts about crucial conversations? They're not
I
fun.
really like the fact that it's not only that myself or the other person is reacting with violence, is unsafe, but reacting with silence. Like, I'm just not gonna talk to you about this anymore. And that's that passive aggressive kind of, to realize, okay, if somebody is acting that way toward me, it's okay for me to view that as unsafe and walk away from it.
And the silence, we think it's a better response than the violence. We think it's taking the high road. When often what is communicated to that other person is, I'm not even worth it for you to have this conversation. You don't even care enough about me to have this conversation. And so silence can be absolutely. And let's be honest, if you guys go silent in a conversation about something that you're harboring, it just builds up as resentment. That's what it is. It creates bitterness, it creates resentment, and it's coming out in some way, shape, or form. It's coming out if you don't deal with it. And we think that we're holding it in, and we think, oh, we're managing it, and it's going to reveal itself at some point. So yeah.
So how would you address it if you're silent because you can't address that person? In other words, you kind of set in silence and you can't address that person, but you have to deal with that without having the bitterness grow and stuff. It's that be still.
So sometimes that pause is longer than others. Sometimes we do have to remove ourselves from that situation, and there is silence because that other person can't have that conversation right now. They're not in a place that they can emotionally or physically or for whatever reason, they can't have that conversation right now. And so it's not silence in terms of I'm tamping down my emotions and I'm just letting that resentment build up, but it's silence because there's a disconnect because you're not able to do that right now. But you've still got to be able to process and deal with what your part of this situation. You can go to trusted friends, you can go to accountability partners, and you can say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with, this is what I'm struggling with. The other person is not in the place that they can reciprocate that and have that conversation right now, but I just need to talk this through with somebody else. And that can help bring healing, even if there is no resolution on the other end in this circumstance.
Like you have accountability with somebody.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Your flashing check with you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts? All right. At the end of your table, Debbie's got some tools that she's actually going to touch on in the next section. But one of the tools that is here on the top of this one is a conflict resolution worksheet that she provided for us. And this is a good place for us to come alongside somebody that we're having an issue with and to kind of work through the steps of this together. It can be you guys working through an actual worksheet if that's helpful. It could be that you work through the worksheet and I work through the worksheet and then we come together and we have something to talk about. Or it can be just that we have a conversation that runs through these steps, but this is a good tool for you guys to use in having some of these crucial conversations. All right? Okay, Debbie? Oh, wait, I think I have questions for you guys. Okay, here are 3 questions at your table, okay? When was the last time you had a conversation that went from cordial to crucial, okay? Cordial to crucial. Were any missteps or mistakes made in that conversation? And how could they be avoided the next time? So talk about those 3 questions at your table. And then Debbie will come up with the next one.
I reckon our politicians, they're gonna read this book.
Oh, yeah.
So. And that's the young tree.
It is.
Either.
they don't see that you don't need to go out to
Different, like, vocabulary.
It's all right.
What do you think? They're important. Like,
Started going back. You're fighting about this thing. I'm fighting about this thing here. So let's have your fight first. Let's talk about that.
You, that's not me.
They shared my.
Right.
So you did, you don't need.
Right.
Oh, I'm so.
You call some friends?
Everybody cried and all, but they tried tried. And then we had a hot dog.
Then that makes
We'll take about 2 more minutes and then we'll move on to the next. I want to give you time to think.
Well, like I said, when
It should be a warning or something. And the whole time I'm thinking, go back.
Is everybody comfortable now that you can handle crucial conversations? We've got candlelight because I've got some tools I want to share with you about change. I did change management with Fortune 500 companies for a number of years, and I did it from the human resources standpoint. I worked a lot of times with human resource departments because it's about people. Change is about people, and the people in your congregation or in the groups that you're working with are going to have very similar reactions to this. And I've got some slides that are going to be available to you. There are, in this set of slides, I'm going to show you their tip sheets. There are explanations of leadership activities for the desert. There are helpful hints to help you as you understand and walk through this process, whether it's in your own personal life, whether it's in your family, your neighborhood, your small group, like a Sunday school class, your whole church, your whole corporation. Because it's about humans, it involves everybody and everything that touches your life. So a lot of this will be helpful to you. I also have some tools for you that are on the table. One of them, this is a coaching tool. You've heard some talk in that last segment on crucial conversations about emotions. This is the one that talks about emotions and behaviors and coaching and leadership action. If someone is in denial, which incidentally, those of you who are well versed in psychological things, denial is one of the strongest things there is. When somebody is in denial, you may have to have a very serious crucial conversation to get them to move beyond that. So learning how to do some of these coaching activities is helpful to you so you don't feel helpless when you know you got a situation and you're not real sure what to do. But this is just a tool for you. It will help you to know how to approach a conversation. I've also got, Ann shared the conflict resolution sheet. You can use that any way that it works for you or not at all, or go on the internet and Google conflict resolution sheets. Yes, ma'am?
I stapled these for Ann and I did them wrong. I just took 2 sheets and stapled them.
Yeah.
How many, what is 52
There were 3 sheets.
Okay, I think they're all messed up and that's my fault.
Okay.
Yeah, but they're all the same. No, they're front and back, I think. You
They
did
could
it
be
right.
front and back prints.
That's good.
This one has, is it right?
Yeah, they gotta look here.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, all right, I'm sorry.
Everybody's getting wild because you know it's almost done today. Okay, the other, I've got 2 tools on communication. Remember me saying earlier, when you go into change and transition, communication tanks. You need to pay very particular attention to how you communicate with people. If you have a transition team, and you will, whether you call it that or acknowledge it to be that, it'll be whoever's working with you on this, whether it's team leaders, whether it's your church council, your administrative board, your staff, whoever it is, you've got a team. And there's a couple of worksheets. One is communication planning for the team that just has questions that you can go through to work through how you're communicating with the church, with everybody about the change. Then there's a communication checklist for the team that has tips at the bottom of things you should remember. If the change is moving forward, if you run into a delay, explain it. Even if you can't tell them everything, tell them what you can. There's just a lot of tips on those 2 sheets for you. And then the phases of communication, change, during change. These have the 4, remember I told you ACA? Awareness, understanding, commitment, and action or acceptance. This is the 4 phases of communication change. When you're communicating, you want to make sure that you cover all the avenues, and these are just some tips to help you do that. So those are some of the tools that will be there for you. I want to look at what's in your book before I get to these slide tools. One of the things that happens when you plan a change is that some people who have put in place all the things that are going on now in the church that you're going to be changing some of them, some people are very invested in those changes because it was their idea to do it, or it was their Aunt Sally's furniture that got put in the parsonage that you decided to replace. And people they're very personal. When you look at change on these slides, you'll see that change for human beings is a 2-part thing. There is the first change, which is the event. Example, you get married. How long, those of you who do the wedding ceremony, how long does that take?
An hour.
An hour? Some are a lot shorter. Mine was 20 minutes. How long does it take you to adjust to being married? I'm 50 years and counting. And I knew my husband from the 3rd grade forward. Change is in 2 parts. There's the change that happens this morning. You moved your watch to your right arm. How many of you have moved your watch back to the left arm? Mm-hmm. You probably have more trouble with change than other people. It's driven me crazy because I know that I'm going to do this. It still drives me crazy. I have not known what time it was because I couldn't find my watch. Adjusting to the change is what people call transition. Some people never completely transition, but they get started. Everybody's in a different process. You need to bear that in mind. When you're dealing with transition, you're dealing with experiences. Ann was talking about experience. You're part of experiences and somebody else's. There are always going to be differences because you're in this phase of change. You're either moving your watch to your right arm or you're trying to live with it being on your right arm. And it's a lot harder to live with it being on your right arm than it is to change it to your right arm. It's a lot easier to get a marriage ceremony, put on the great dress, walk down the aisle, have the cake and the punch, wave goodbye, go on the honeymoon, than it is to be married for 45 years. It takes a very long time. It's a time-based thing. Transition is time-based. So when we start looking at all of these things that we're looking at, We need to understand that there are some components to change. And again, you're going to get copies of these slides. There's three parts. There's the circumstances around us. There's the reorientation in us. And there's a third one, and this is huge. This is where a lot of the emotion and the conflict and the loss, the sense of loss comes in, and that's the resonance. If you play a piano or you play a guitar and you pluck a string, what happens? Makes a noise. And then what? It stays in the air. Can you hear it for a little while? I get earworms sometimes. I'll think of a song and it will not get out of my head. It drives me nuts, those stupid Barney songs that my grandchildren did. I hate them. Resonance is changes that happened in the past. My parents divorced when I was 12. So anytime my husband and I had a fight, the resonance for me was, oh God, what if we get a divorce like my mom and dad? It's all psychological, it's all emotional, but it comes to bear on any change that happens to me because I revert back to remember that pot of emotions in my experience. When things changed for me, they never were the same again. That's a loss. Anytime you're dealing with change, even if it's just, I'm going to move the pew that you've been sitting in for 30 years from the front of the church to the back of the church, because it'll make the church look nicer. That's not what it means for you. What it means that where you've been sitting for 30 years ain't going to be there anymore. That's a loss. A lot of this is a little bit like dealing with grief. And you'll see when we go through some of these tool slides that you'll have, is that some of these are the stages of grief for those of you who deal with that and working with folks. We don't resist change. I hope everybody here's got on clean underwear today. You know, you change your clothes, you change your hairdos. I changed the color of my hair. I changed from glasses to contacts. If my husband buys me a new car, I'm driving. Change is not the issue. Transition is the issue. Uncomfortable, remember when Ann said we like to stay in our comfort zone? Well, anytime we change something, we have to step out of our comfort zone, and then we have to reorientate ourselves, and then we hear all those songs from the past, and it just becomes an issue for us. And that's why emotion is such a huge part of transition. We don't want to deal with the losses in our lives. We don't want to deal with the uncertainty of the future. We don't want to deal with the risk. What if this doesn't work? What if I don't do things right? What if I fail? All of those things come up, and that's why we have such an issue with transition. And I want to share this model with you because I hope this will help you to understand what some of the issues are in dealing with your congregation. This is a guy named William Bridges. He's deceased now. He was Jewish, and he went through a divorce. He was in California, where that happens a lot. Anyway, I had the opportunity and the privilege to work with him. But as a Jewish gentleman, going through a divorce was an extremely traumatic event for him in his life. And he struggled because he was a man of great faith, and he finally settled on Exodus. He kept saying, as he was going through this process, and he was bitter, and he was angry, and he was resentful, and he was just really not being very nice. And he struggled with, God, how can you do this to me? And then he thought, I'm such a nut. What is the pivotal moment in the Jews was the Exodus, when God took the people out of Egypt and took them to the promised land. And so he started spending a lot of time dwelling on Exodus and what God said in the book. And he realized that God had given Moses and Joshua a plan for how to do change and transition with his people. And what God did is he took them out of Egypt, where they were slaves making straw bricks without straw, basically. He took, if you can see what happens when you say, if this is a timeline, he had them leave Egypt, and then he let them be in the desert for a lot of years, but finally he brought them to the promised land. And this is what William Bridges saw was that what happened with him in the phase of his divorce is that when he didn't know he was going to have a divorce, he was fine, and then he found out he was having a divorce, and his whole life was disrupted, and he had to deal with the losses. But then there was a time when he finally accepted the losses, and he moved into the desert, if you will, and he calls that the neutral zone. My husband said that's a Star Trek thing, but anyway, William Bridges obviously liked Star Trek because the neutral zone was a place where the old way's gone and it ain't coming back, but the new way's not in place. So the neutral zone is a really great area. It's like the fog and you're trying to drive. You can only see that far in front of the car, and it's very nerve-wracking. But the fact is you can make a 1,000-mile journey that way, but you can only go 3 feet at the time. You just have to be slower. You can't go 70 miles an hour down I-95. But at some point, you reach the promised land and you get a whole new beginning. What you notice about this is that you've got your 10%. This is the 80-20 rule, that's what it is. You've got, at the very beginning when you announce the change, you've got your 10% adapters. That 10%, they jump right on it, man. They're already in the new beginning, and everybody else doesn't even know we're changing anything yet because they're so far ahead of the rest of us. Most of us are crying and mad and resentful and upset and thinking it's not going to work and figuring it's the preacher's fault. If it's not his fault, it's the DS's fault, or it's somebody that leads the choir or somebody that built the building. It's somebody's fault but mine. It's not mine. So you got most of the people dealing with endings. You got a few people who are pretty sharp and they figured out things are going to change big time. And they hit the neutral zone as soon as somebody says the word change and transition. Because they've been there, done that, and got the t-shirt, and they know what it means. So they're already in the neutral zone. So at any given time during this process, you've got a lot of people dealing with certain things and some people dealing with other things. Then you get to the wilderness, and you got all these people driving in the fog, but you've got a few people that are already in the promised land, and you got the dissenters down here who ain't even going to the promised land. And as time goes on and you get nearer and nearer, you get most of the people ready for the new beginning. You got a few people who are still driving in the fog and may always be in the fog, and you got the dissenters who are not going to drive in the fog and they're not going to the promised land. And then you get finished and you cross over, and Joshua becomes your new leader because God didn't let Moses go. And what happened? We start the whole process over again because we got a new preacher. So this is a process just like everything else. But what it will help you to do is you understand the process. As a leader of your church, you realize that there's some things you do when people are dealing with endings, and some things you do when they're driving in the gray neutral zone, and some things you do when you get to the new beginning. And so these slides, some of them will help you. They're just, again, I won't go through them, but just briefly to let you know, but you'll get this, so you'll have this to look at. The experience during endings, you heard Ann talk about it. Sometimes people are in denial, sometimes they're angry, sometimes they're bargaining. These are your grief stages as well. Sometimes they're sad, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of conflict, and I'll put something else in there that's not on the slide. The most normal, common behavior during endings is overreaction. Most people, when I was leading the transition team at White Bluff to let Gateway use half our property every Sunday, and I said, you're going to have a lot of people who are angry, and they said, 15 people sitting there. That's just not going to happen. These are Christian people. I wanted to laugh. I asked them at our very last meeting 2 years later, how did you feel about that training? They said, we never in many years thought people would get so mad. Had no idea. It happens. It happens. This is feeling during ending. Some people feel guilty because they wanted to change. And everybody else is mad and upset. And they feel guilty because they really think it's a good idea, but they don't want to say so. Resentment, a lot of people will resent you, they'll resent a change team, they'll resent, like I said, the DS, anybody they can think of. Fear and anxiety is very prevalent. There's a lot of stress and self-absorption on your part and their part at different times. A lot of change is pretty stressful. I mean, there's a good bit going on. I often refer people to Exodus because that's where God gives us a plan, and we'll see that. There's a lot of things that you experience during transition, and you have to wear a lot of hats as a leader. It's very important. You have to be able to understand this. You have to be committed to the change. You have to be accepting and willing to take action, but you have to deal with all these behaviors at the same time. You're going to feel apprehensive, sometimes confused, sometimes detached, excitement. When you get to the neutral zone, if you think back to that model, you got some people who are already in the new beginning, some people who are never going to change, and the vast people in the middle are driving in the fall. It's a very interesting time, but you know what you find in that time? With those people that are orange up there at the top and they've already moved to the new beginning, they start getting excited because they see all the possibilities that are coming. They're those idea people that there's only a few of them, but they're pretty vocal sometimes. It's an exciting time once you get to the neutral zone. Church life in transition is roller coaster, up and down. You don't understand why we're doing this. Some days you wake up and say, why are we doing this? It's too much trouble. Some people feel lost. Some people will lose it. And it's amazing because it's going to be somebody that you never thought would do that. People that we thought were the saints of the church that just had complete meltdowns because something got changed that they didn't want changed. It was a surprise to them and to us. What is going on is the one question. Now, desert essentials for the leader, you have to communicate. Communicate, communicate. 7 times, 7 ways before people hear it. People go deaf when they're stressed out. If you go in and tell your church, we're going to grow and add 200 members next year, that's going to stress some people out. People under stress go deaf. If you go to see your doctor, he does some tests, you go in to chat with him after he gets the results, and he says, I need you to see an oncologist. Some people don't know that an oncologist is a cancer doctor. But the people who know what an oncologist is go deaf. So I suggest when somebody's going, I have a friend who was suffering from multiple myeloma. She was going to have a stem cell transplant. When she went to meet with the doctors, we suggested she take 2 friends, one to take notes and the other one to listen. So that for the next 6 months, while she was getting ready to go through this process, she had the notes and she had the 2 friends who were there with her. And she said, what did he say when I said, this is because you're so stressed, you're deaf. That's why when you communicate as a leader, 7 ways, 7 times. Every way you can think of to communicate. Use temporary solutions. Increase learning. Have things like this. If you want, I'll give you my email address and I'll give you my cell phone number. And if you want to call me in and on the phone with your transition team and say, talk to us about communication. Talk to me about what we need to do. Or you want to just call me and say, this is what we're thinking, Debbie. You think this is good? What else could we do? Have we done everything we can? I'm happy to be your consultant. Oh, let me go back to this one. Let go of the outcome. It is very difficult in a leader who's trying to help change for them not to decide in their mind what it looks like when we get to the promised land. And sometimes your vision is not the complete one because you got all the rest of the people in the church to deal with. And so you need to be sure that you are open to other people's ideas and suggestions and that you're not fixing the outcome in your mind. Leadership in the desert. Show up, be present, and pray. There's a difference between showing up and being present. If you show up and all you can think about is, man, I got to talk to the DS, they got to get me out of this come June. You are not being present. If you can't be present, you need to get yourself under control. There's a lot of other possibilities there. Be open and clear and practice integrity. Tell the truth. Sometimes it's very hard to do that when a change you propose is going to cause a lot of heartache and grief, a lot of anger. It's really hard to tell the truth. You want to just, my daughter-in-law does this well, just tell them some of the truth. If you don't tell them all of the truth, maybe they'll do better. If you don't tell them all the truth, they will pin you to the wall when they finally figure it out. And then you won't have much integrity, and keep your sense of humor. Laugh. You know, if you can't make it funny, it probably shouldn't have happened. But anyway, take the best of the past into the future with you. Find a way. If there are a lot of people grieving during the lost period of the change, I don't know what it might be. It'll be really individual to your own different churches. But you may need to find a way to help people celebrate how much we've done up till now to get us where we are. You need to note that. All these people that work to build you up to a church of 100, when you say you want to make it be a church of 250, it's like, so what are we? Chump change? I mean, we've been working 20 years to get to this level. Why can't we celebrate that? That's important. You know, if we didn't have the first 100 people, we sure couldn't get 200 more. Just be aware, people are real interesting in the neutral zone and in the desert at what hurts them. Be sure to try to take the best of the past into the future. This is your to-do list. There are all sorts of things that you can do, but be good to yourself. Treat yourself with respect. Let yourself cut you some slack. You can't be all things to all people. If you're trying to be the team leader of change, or you're the leader of your church undergoing a lot of change, you're going to be under stress. And I know this. I'm not a pastor, but I've watched a lot of them. And being a pastor is a stressful job. A lot of church members don't understand that. They think it's easy to be pastor. Well, you only have to work one day a week. I mean, how hard could it be, you know, if you only work 1 day a week? That's not so. It's a 24/7 job. Your phone rings at 3 o'clock in the morning and somebody's in the emergency room, you gotta go. There's a lot more to it than people think. So be good to yourself. When you're leading people in the desert, it's really important. In the plan in Exodus, God gave Moses 4 things that he needed to do. And this is what you need to remember if you don't remember anything else I've said today about change. If you present these 4 things, people will change and they will transition with a minimal amount of disruption and pain. You can't do anything that's a significant change without some people being unhappy about it. And you're always going to have those dissenters. Some people, that's why one of the suggestions in here in this last section is seek general consensus, not unanimous agreement. Not everyone needs to be involved with everything, and not everyone needs to agree before you move on, because there's some people who will never agree. We still have people at White Bluff who say, we never should have let Gateway come into the church. They just mess up. I keep parking my regular parking place. They have never gotten over it. They have 90 people there on Sunday. That's 90 people we were never going to reach. Praise God that we've been willing to let them do that. And we hope they have 900 people and we have to go do somewhere else, and so do they, because they've had so much success. God said to Moses, I took you out of Egypt because you are not destined to be slaves. You are my people. And I want a relationship with you, and I'm going to give you your own land, and I'm going to be your God, and you're going to be my people. Jeremiah said it. It was said to Jeremiah way back then. That's what God had a purpose, and it was that the people of Egypt that were in Egypt were his people, and he wanted to take them to Israel to be his people, and he's still doing that today. He gave them a picture. When you think about what was it that they said about the promised land, what's it going to look like? A land of milk and honey. All these years later, we still know that was the picture he painted for them. He painted them a picture. How you do that in your group is up to you. You'll figure it out. Somebody will need to create a picture of what it's going to look like when the change is complete. Like I said, when we were trying to talk about what would happen, how would we know we would be successful with Gateway? When we start fighting over parking places because there's nowhere to park and we got 500 parking places, then we'll know we succeeded. The path or the plan. If you don't have a plan or a path that you can share continually with people, it's okay if you're upset. It's okay if things are not really quite what we want, because we got this plan. And by this time next month, maybe you'll see a little more progress and feel a little better about it. You have to be able to go back and point to the purpose and the picture and the plan. And the last piece, and this is huge, a part to play. People change when they have those 4 things, because that's God's plan and He created us. So He knew what He was doing. Moses gave them the purpose, the picture, the path, and the part to play like God told them to. And it took every one of them to move that stupid tabernacle around. And I love that tabernacle. I love to study it because it's fascinating. It's a perfect picture of salvation. But the part to play is crucial. If you involve everybody, now, everybody may not need to be involved. When we were putting together the transition team for the Gateway Project at White Rock, our preacher wanted to put all of the naysayers that didn't want to do it on the team. I said, do not hamstring us that way. We will spend our whole time focusing on their problems with this and no time making it happen. So be careful, because sometimes who you've got on the team, you heard this from Ann, the diversity of your team, people that think differently. If everybody thinks just alike on the team, you're not going to be as successful as if you have people that think differently. And I can turn to you in the middle of the meeting and say, okay, you haven't said anything. What are you thinking? And that's facilitated behavior. So when you're working with a team, you may need to bring in an idea person and you tell them, I'm bringing you in because you're my idea person. Or I may call up Jay Hansen and say, Jay, I need you to come sit down with us at our next 2-hour meeting. We're going to have it when you can come, because you're a big time idea person. And I'm going to bring you in for just that one meeting, and you can share ideas with us. Help us to move, from where we are. Bring in new people, maybe just for 2 meetings. You don't have to make them a team member. You just have them come in and share things with you, because that's so important. These 4 things, if you can do these 4 things, people will be able to move forward with minimal disruption. This is about managing the risk of making the change and hurting as few people as you can and helping people to grow. If you focus on the opportunities in the change, the new ministries, a new future, what could develop, what could be better, all these are things you might think about. Strategies, these are strategies for leaders in the desert. Utilize available conference support. That's what you're doing today. I mean, and has created this wonderful program. You're almost through it. Hallelujah. Mm-hmm. Celebrate your victories, because this is one thing to remember. God the Father created change. His Son, Jesus Christ, changes lives every day. And the Holy Spirit walks with us hand in hand through every change there is in life. And we serve a risen God, and He's about change. He's the one who first changed the darkness and brought in the light. So He understands. So that's why prayer, everything, I think the term Ann uses is everything must be bathed in prayer. And I know if you're serving as a pastor, you pray more than most, because it's a tough thing. These are tools that you will get. The 6 things that you've got, all of these touch on the 6 things in your workbook. Staying focused on the purpose, the plan, the picture, the part play. All those are real important for you. I hope that this has been helpful to you. I know we've probably gone over time because Ann's standing at sorry about that. I have enjoyed being with y'all today, and I will continue to pray for this group. I think this is wonderful, what y'all are doing. I'm thrilled for you that you've had this opportunity and that Ann have put this together. It's an exciting thing, so I will shut up and let y'all move on.
Thank you. All right. So your brains are full, your hearts are full, you're ready to go have some crucial conversations. Woo! One of the things that I wanted to remind you guys of, here are the assignments tasks that have been due up until this point. Some of you guys are at various levels of getting everything turned in. Your deadline is totally up to you, okay? So you guys turn those in whenever you can. I know that some of you guys have put some assignments up here. So if you have your spiritual rule, make sure that you put that on the table before you leave. If some of you guys need copies of that so you can get that back, I can scan that this week and then return it to you. So if you guys gave me like your only original that you have, then make sure that you make a note for me on an index card and just stick it up here with your spiritual rule to say, hey, I'd like to have this back, and that way I'll scan it. I just can't wait to see your spiritual rules. I'm probably just as excited as you guys are about those things. So I hope that was a good process for you guys this week as you reflected on how God is calling you to grow in your faith. A couple of housekeeping things. So just last night, as a matter of fact, Nita gave us a list of, let me turn this off, a list of requirements for finishing up our